Welcome back to Hardball. Dick Cheney's at it again, telling Wyoming Republicans over the weekend that President Obama's national security appointments don't live up to the high standards set by the stellar legacy of the Bush-Cheney years. Cheney's team, of course, was filled with the likes of Donald Rumsfeld and John Bolton. Well, in Cheney's words, quote, the performance now of Barack Obama as he staffs up the national security team for the second term is dismal. Frankly, what he has appointed are second-rate people. Well, agree or disagree with his politics, John Kerry is not a second-rate choice for Secretary of State, certainly. He served as chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and he came close to being the president of the United States. Senator Kerry, as well as Senator Chuck Hagel, both served honorably in Vietnam and in combat, while Dick Cheney made sure that he got 5 different deferments to avoid fighting a war, Vietnam, that he loved supporting. So let's take a look at the Cheney legacy and see how it stacks up to the president's so-called second-rate team. We've got an expert, Howard Fineman, editorial director of the Huffington Post, and Joe Walsh is editor-at-large of Salon. Both are MSNBC political analysts. By the way, Dick Cheney says the president's national security team is second-rate, a great phrase he knew would be coined quickly, and that's rich coming from the man who did more than most anyone to sell the U.S. on a completely unnecessary war. Take a look.
You know with absolute certainty that he is using his procurement system to acquire the equipment he needs in order to enrich uranium to build a nuclear weapon. We believe he has, in fact, reconstituted nuclear weapons. I really do believe we will be greeted as liberators. We learn more and more that there was a relationship between Iraq and al-Qaeda that stretched back through most of the decade of the 90s, that it involved training, for example, on BW and CW, that al-Qaeda sent personnel to Baghdad to get trained on those systems, and involved the Iraqis providing bomb-making expertise and advice to the al-Qaeda organization.
Howard, where do you learn to be that evil? I mean, that guy sat there and brilliantly conspired. He had Judy Miller writing the stories for the weekend with Scooter feeding her the stuff, gets a time so he gets a get, they're going to meet the press, does the alley-oop play, acts so avuncular, so sure of himself in his presentation that a lot of middle-of-the-road people bought it.
Just watching that again, Chris, was both infuriating and upsetting. We lived through that time. We were lied to, flat out lied to in that way. And for him to say that the president is appointing second-raters, that was first-rate bilge. Okay, I can't say more. If that's what first-rate is, I'll take the second-rate.
You know, Joan, his avuncular fashion, that we now know, that bonding he did with the viewer. I knew the trick even. It was almost criminal. We now know, talking to whoever he's talking to at the anchor desk there, establishing a kind of bond among those reasonable people, all the time pushing this bilge, all the time pushing stuff that he had conspired with his chief of staff and his whatever his press wing was at the time to feed into the New York Times, feed into the national news, so that after a while people said he can't be lying all the time and coming up with great phrases like weapons of mass destruction and intermingling those with either chemical or biological, or occasionally throwing in the fact that they've got some balsa wood airplane that's going to fly over here with a nuclear bomb and drop it in Washington. Anything that would get that war started, they were willing to say, including sending General Powell out there with his mission at the UN.
It's such an ugly legacy, Chris. But, you know, we've been talking about this for 4 years, 5 years now.
Why is he still talking? Why does he still have an audience in this country on the right?
Well, actually, I want to look on the bright side here, because it used to be that his every utterance was national news, and he literally faxed a press release to Politico, and they printed it a couple of years ago, trashing the president.
I remember that, how he used to feed Politico that way.
He's done that over and over. But now, there he is. He's just with his home state Republican Party, where he kind of belongs. And I also want to point out that his 2 home state Republican senators voted for John Kerry, so they don't agree with him that he's a second-rate person. He really doesn't have the kind of power that he had before. He's been fully discredited, and yet, yes, we are still going to talk about it when he says things like this, because it's so ridiculous to be trashing this president all these years later when he's had a stellar record on foreign policy and national security.
These Babbitts that sit in the audience for people like him. Well, these burgers. You can just see them from the Rotary Club going very polite. Oh, ho, ho. I can just hear the audience. Excellent point. Well put, Vice President. This second rate. Of course, they all agree they wouldn't have approved these people out there. Wyoming doesn't deserve this guy. Well, sorry, it's a beautiful state.
I think that maybe Dick Cheney has a case of drone envy here.
Yeah.
Really?
Well, I mean,
Go on, sir.
Okay. He's the guy who's used to being attacked by the ACLU.
Oh, I see.
You see what I'm saying? Actually, President Obama has got some weapons that Dick Cheney wouldn't mind having had. And the president,
this is getting way too sexual.
Okay, no,
Howard.
And the president,
pull back.
And the president has been unafraid to use them.
Right.
No, the serious point here is that the Republicans spent a generation unhorsing Democrats because Democrats were, quote, weak on defense.
They weren't willing to pull the trigger.
They weren't willing to pull the trigger. Barack Obama, to the dismay of the ACLU, has been perfectly willing to pull the trigger, and he's done it pretty effectively in terms of decimating al-Qaeda, which was supposedly the original intent of what Dick Cheney was up to when we invaded Iraq.
Well, questions still linger about what role Dick Cheney played in outing Valerie Plame as a CIA officer. Patrick Fitzgerald, the federal prosecutor, said there is a cloud over him. That's what he said back then. And here's why, according to Time magazine, quote, though his recollection of other events at the same time frame was lucid and detailed, on at least 20 occasions, Scooter Libby, Cheney's chief of staff, could not recall details of his talks with Cheney about Plame's place of employment or questions the vice president raised privately about Wilson's credibility. Some Bush officials, these are Bush officials, wondered whether Libby was covering up for Cheney's involvement in the leak of Plame's identity. Joan, I have to tell you, I respect Scooter Libby in one regard, loyalty. He has kept, and it is a strange loyalty, he has never brought Cheney into this thing. Cheney's been able to use crocodile tears to pretend he cared about the guy. He referred to him as a soldier left on the field. Excuse me, there are 4,000 real soldiers left on the field. Right. And somehow he comes off as the sympathetic guy, when in fact, this guy wasn't out robbing gas stations. He was doing what the vice president told him to be doing, which was leaking stories to discredit Valerie Wilson. Your thoughts?
Well, I agree. We never were able to really fully make that connection, but that connection has seemed implicit. And when your chief of staff is sentenced to 30 months in prison for his role in outing a CIA officer, you do go down in history and lying about it. You do go down in history with a cloud over your reputation, but it's a cloud that is accompanied by all the other things that we've said here. And, you know, I think Howard's right, and I think that he also did the president a favor, because those of us who've been upset about the drone policies, we can't go around calling Barack Obama Cheney light, because now we are really reminded of the source of evil from the White House, from that administration. So I'm sure the president is happy. You can't compare anybody
to Dick Cheney.
No.
By the way, that snarl that he has when he talks with that evil manner of his, and it's this sort of avuncular, as I said, when he snarls, you know, that thing. It's hardly Elvis Presley snarling either. It's a whole new kind of snarling. When he does that, I got to say, this is just, thank God a troll occasionally looks like a troll. And you can actually, look at that way he walks, that proud.
Well, I get uncomfortable with that kind of language sometimes, Chris, maybe because I'm not strong enough to deal with it. But I think what's missing here is that Dick Cheney, as the former vice president, is the guy who propounded his theory of the world, and his Republican allies on the Hill are not having a serious discussion about foreign policy in defense during these nomination hearings. Whether it's Hagel or Brennan or whatever, they're just taking cheap shots all over the place, and they're not having a serious discussion.
What is?
In other words, if Dick Cheney wants to get in the ball game and have a really serious discussion about it, fine.
You raised this. I got to answer your question. What is the burr in Lindsey Graham's saddle?
Well,
why is he putting a hold on Hagel? What is this?
He's not in the end going to put a hold on Hagel. That's just he's just grabbing his ankles on the way out the door. Okay. Yeah. Hagel's going to be confirmed. It's a done deal. John McCain has blessed it. John McCain said he gave the committee enough to Hagel. Said Hagel gave the committee enough information. I'm not going to hold him up on Benghazi. It's just. I think that Lindsey Graham is there to be the last annoying guy to make sure that Hagel keeps whatever promises he made. Behind the scenes,
Howard, the Cisco kid,
to Carl Levin and Chuck Schumer and everybody else.
The Cisco kid may have handed an okay here, but Poncho's still fighting the war. Anyway, thank you, Howard Fineman. Thank you, John Walsh, for the older viewers. Coming up, Michelle Bachmann has company on the anti-Muslim fringe, the latest conspiracy theory from the far right. We bring it to you for sheer entertainment. And this is Hardball, the place for politics.